minutes ago, and you was fixing to start the school, and you might be I heard the wisest man in the world say there ain't no reason to get any knowledge. I ain't going to school. But without context, then you're left with a misunderstanding of what is being said here. And hopefully we'll be able to clear up that misunderstanding and go right into a diligent study of this book so that we'll know more about it and more about life itself, really, after we have studied this book. We talked somewhat about it. Of course, we're going to be answering questions, and some of the questions are not just that easy to answer, for sure, so you have to think about it. But one thing that we need to understand right at the outset of this book is this is a book that was written by an inspired man, but that don't mean that everything he said was right. You remember, a fool has said in his heart there is no God. Does the Bible say there is no God? Yeah. But who says it? Fool does. See? So keep that in mind as we go through here, because everything that's said is an accurate portrayal of what Solomon was saying and thinking at the time. But that don't mean it's what God intends for us to believe, for sure. Let me just think about that devotional reading a few minutes ago. The more you learn, the more ignorant you are. Best thing to do is not learn much. Just stay stupid. Well, now there's the wisest man in the world that said something like that. Why would he say something like that? You see, when we get at that, then we'll be learning just exactly what we need to learn from these things. I found in my study, and I think this is good for us to consider this before we get into the text, some purposes for the book of Ecclesiastes that will make it more discernible, that will be able to differentiate between things as we study along. Number one, the writer wishes to convince his readers of the vanity of any worldview which does not rise above man and his earthly surroundings. Okay? So that's a death nail in the head of the atheist or the agnostic. See? That says this world is it. That there is no afterlife. Well, this book says that if you take that position, you're in a terrible position for sure. Because life without a future is a desperate, destituted thing that you're engaged in for sure. Second, he demonstrates the utter inefficiency of all earthly pursuits and material things to bring true happiness. Having done this, and of course this is him, he's got everything at his disposal. He's not only the wisest man, he's the richest man. He labors to draw us away from that which is only apparently good to that which is real and enduringly good. Namely, as we'll get to the end of the book and see that the real thing in life is fearing God and keeping his commandments. And all the other stuff is grasping after the wind, is what he ultimately says. He argues that one may enjoy every mental, physical, and social pleasure along with the riches, the fame, and the honor, and still never realize his true purpose for existing. In so doing, he'll miss the only genuine and lasting joy. And I've used this illustration I don't know how many times. On the back side of the 45 record entitled, well, the most popular song, of course, is In the Ghetto by Elvis Presley. On the other side of that record is A Satisfied Mind. And here's old Elvis. He's singing how it's so hard to find a man with a satisfied mind. You think Elvis had a satisfied mind? Well, of course not. He was miserable. He's trying to find happiness in all the wrong places. Now we're going to do country music songs. Looking for love in all the wrong places. So we know that to be the case just by observation. Secondly, he teaches us that the absence of God from one's life allows the entrance of every kind of unhappiness. If you want to experience this world and all that unhappiness that the world has to offer, then just leave God out. And you can do a pretty good job of that. Now, you'll be miserable ultimately, and you'll die lost, but you can reach for all the gusto you want to in this life if you so desire. And then, number 5, he wants us to see God as the ultimate standard by which every aspect of life must be interpreted. And, of course, we know that to be the case as well. Then keep in mind, and we'll repeat this again, the arguments that are advanced in this book are Solomon's arguments. They're not God's arguments, even though he's inspired as he writes. This is his inspired description of life without God, because he's estranged from God for years. You think he's with God when he's got 1,000 women at his disposal? Well, of course not. You think he's with God and in fellowship with God when he's building houses of worship for his wives and their heathen deities? Well, of course not, you know. He's estranged from God during that whole time, which just proves you can be smart and ignorant all at the same time. You can be smart in stuff that don't matter and ignorant in stuff that does matter. And somebody says, that's about the ignorantest thing I ever heard said. But that's the truth. You might express it a little bit more correctly than that, but that's the facts of the case. And Solomon demonstrates that over and over and over again. One other thing that I thought was interesting, some interesting facts about the book is there are, of course, you don't find any mentions, there's no mention of the Messiah in the book for sure. And the book is primarily addressed to youth. But of course, in the Hebrew mind, you're a youth until you're 40. So that takes into a large group of people. And the idea is, you know, if you get your life together by the time you're 40, then that's good. By the time of 40, if you've been working at it all that time, then maybe you can hang on and live faithful the rest of your life, ever how long it is. And while it is looked upon as being one of the most difficult books to interpret, when you understand who's writing it and why, then it's not really that hard, you know. And we'll see that as we go along. And, of course, it is a book that is the favorite of some of the cults in the world. Seventh-day Adventists, Jehovah's Witnesses, those that deny the eternal nature of the soul, those that believe in soul sleeping, well, they think they have justification for that in this book. And we'll see, of course, that they don't. They don't have it at all. All right. As you can see, my throat is not working for me correctly today. It's like there's a little bitty old pinhole I'm trying to talk through. But anyhow, let's start with I found a comment in a commentary. Has anybody ever heard of the Targums? The Targums, okay? And, of course, that's not something you'd be exposed to in just a regular old Bible class. You'd have to go to a preacher training school or college one to find out anything about the Targums. But the Targums are, in essence, a set of commentaries on the Old Testament for the purpose of teaching people who no longer can speak Hebrew. That's what it's all about, you know. And, of course, you could figure... There's interesting, if you got your Bibles, turn to Nehemiah chapter 8. Nehemiah chapter 8, because I think this is a pretty good illustration of what we're talking about here. You remember, this is, of course, after the return of the children of Israel to Jerusalem after being carried into Babylonian captivity and all. And remember, Ezra is standing up there in the middle of the gate, the water gate, and he begins to speak, and all the people stand up. And what happens is when you get down to about verse 8, of course, it identifies the people in verse 7 that caused the people to understand the law, and the people stood in their place. So they read in the book and the law of God distinctly and gave the sense and caused them to understand the reading. Now, one of the problems that existed at this time, because we're talking about 400, 500 BC, is that there was a whole lot of people that hadn't been raised in a culture in which Hebrew was the language spoke. Okay? So if they had a copy of the law, they couldn't read it. They didn't know it, you know. And so these Targums, and there's a bunch of them, were commentaries to help people understand what the law had said. Now, it wasn't a version, a translation or anything. It was a commentary-like thing. And interestingly, at the beginning of one of those Targums, speaking of this book, I want you to just listen to what it says about the book of Ecclesiastes. The words of the prophecy which the preacher prophesied, the same is Solomon, son of David the king, who was in Jerusalem. For when Solomon, king of Israel, saw by the spirit of prophecy that the kingdom of Rehoboam his son was about to be divided with Jeroboam, the son of Nebat, and the house of the sanctuary was about to be destroyed, and the people of Israel sent into captivity, he said in his word, Vanity of vanities is all that I have labored, and David my father, they are together, altogether vanity. Now, is that accurate? Well, I don't know. It could be, But what he's saying, what the Targums are saying here is that Solomon sees into the future, and he's writing about how that everything was done beforehand is going to be coming for naught because of the foolish decision of his son, and then a renegade by the name of Jeroboam, and the country is going to be split in half. So he says that's all coming. That's what the Targums say. Now, that all happened for sure, And the time frame that would have been written would have been probably 500 BC, So to say that it's a prophecy of what Solomon was looking to that was fixing to happen, which meant all of the good that had been done was going to be for naught because they were going to be taken into captivity, that's possible, That's a reason why he's writing that. But it's sad commentary on what the people were facing in their failure to simply follow the will of God in this matter, for sure. Any comments or any questions before we go into trying to answer some of these questions? Now, specifically, what I want you to make sure in the little outline at the first of the paper, the first of the handouts, is very beneficial in seeing where you're at and how it relates to the specific verses that we're dealing with and answering the questions for sure. And of course, when you say the thesis statement, it's like I'll say sometimes, John chapter 20, verse 30 and 31 is a thesis statement for the book of John. In other words, John writes, and many other signs truly did Jesus in the presence of his disciples, which are written in this book, but these are written that you might believe that Jesus Christ is the Son of God, and that believing you might have life through his name. So there in 2 verses, John says, here's the reason why this book is being written. It's to draw people to look at the evidence and draw the conclusion that Jesus Christ is the Son of God. That's the reason why we got it. Well, the thesis of this book is, sadly, all is vanity. And of course, we could keep in mind each time you see that, all is vanity when God's not in the picture, because that's implied. All is like chasing the wind if God's not in the picture. All is an ultimate waste of time if God's not in the picture. And he's going to illustrate that in every area of life in this book. I don't think there's any area of life that's not touched on, at least some, in this book. All right, let's look at our questions. And it's been a long time since we started at one place and went around the room and made everybody answer, or in a sad way say, no, go to the next person. So we won't do that either now, if y'all don't want to. So let's answer together. What do we know about the author of this book? We know he's referred to as the preacher. And we mentioned on the Wednesday night, the word preacher, of course, is the word that ends up being found in the Septuagint. But the idea is the person that convenes a crowd for the purpose of speaking to them. So somebody says, well, that sounds like a preacher to me, And that's exactly what he's doing, is calling together a crowd, hopefully all the people that are at his disposal to listen to his writing and learn from him as he preaches here. What's another thing we know about him? He's the son of David. Now, David didn't have just one son, but he's further identified as being what? King in Jerusalem. And there ain't one person that fits that bill, okay? Son of David. Don't even have to identify him as Solomon, because the only son of David that was king in Jerusalem is Solomon, okay? So we know that to be the author. Number 2, what made the author qualified to speak on the subject of life, would you say? Now, there's one you got to think about a little bit. That's exactly what I put, Sarah. This fella experienced more life in his lifetime than just about anybody could, He had the ability to, he had the money to, He had the influence to. He had the power to. He did anything and everything he wanted to do, even if it's wrong, you know. So he could truly be one who, in all these different situations, he could speak with authority because he'd been there and because he'd done that. He'd been involved in the very things that he's talking about. He's not talking about what somebody else has done. He's talking about the things that he himself has done and the observations that he himself has made about the stuff that he's done. And, of course, he's making observations about things he's observed, too. But this is personal knowledge. You know, this is not secondhand information. This is certainly a person who has been there and has done that. Then number 3, define the word vanity. How would you define that word? Do what? Emptiness. Okay. Exactly. That's why it's pictured as being grasping after the wind, you know. I mean, once you've got it, you still have nothing. It's worthless. There's nothing lasting to it. The word, did somebody say something? Worthless, okay. And the thing is, the word literally means, that's, of course, it's changed to apply to what we've all said, but it means vapor or breath, you know. That's what the Hebrew word means. And so if all life is vapor or breath, wow, boy, that ain't much for life, is it? It's just air. All of life is air. And of course, the fact is, without God in the picture, it is. That's exactly what it is. It's just a waste of time. Then number 4, how are all things vanity? How can you say that all things are vanity? All right. All things of this world, without the place of God in it, are ultimately going to come to a screeching halt, you know. And so you can classify all earthly things, even things that are good, used for good purposes, they are vanity if God is not in the picture, you know. It's like this morning on Good News Today, Cody was using the example of a spotlight. He had a spotlight on his little Cody's Corner, you know. And he was saying that spotlight is not what a Christian is supposed to try to get into, you know. He's not supposed to be the person that, such as in Matthew chapter 6, when he does charitable deeds, he blows a horn and says, look what I'm doing. Put the spotlight on himself. He's not supposed to do that, see. And, of course, back in Matthew chapter 5, when he says we're the light of the world, a city that's set on the hill cannot be hid, and man don't light a candle, put it under a bushel, but on a lampstand, or on somewhere in the middle of the table where it can give light to all that's in the house. And then he says, let your light so shine before men that you might get a bozo button. Well, that's not what he says. You let your light shine before men that they may see your good works, but then glorify God which is in heaven. So even in doing the things that we do that are good, it's not the purpose for getting a spotlight on us. It's for the purpose of bringing glory to God, because that's why we're supposed to be doing what we're doing anyhow, see. And that's, of course, what makes any of these trivial things in life that are time-consuming, that we have to work at, if it's not connected to God, then it truly is vanity. It is worthless, ultimately. You know, you remember in 1 Corinthians chapter 15 at verse 58, therefore, my beloved brethren, be ye steadfast, unmovable, always abounding in the work of the Lord, for as much as you know that your labor is not in vain in the Lord. Now, while that sets forth a positive, it also sets forth the negative. It implies directly that everything we do that's not for the Lord is ultimately vain. Isn't that amazing? So that means a person that never does think about his soul, never does think about God, never does think about the Bible, his whole existence is worthless. And probably even worse than worthless, because it contributes to the lostness of a whole lot of other people. Now, if we get people to see that, you know, we'll have no empty seats. If we can get them to admit that, which is observable, you know, it's obvious, it's clear from Scripture, common sense would tell you it. But still, people choose the wrong things in life. All right, number 5. Now, this is a very interesting question because this is a phrase that comes up all the way through the book, and it's very, very helpful to understand. Explain the phrase under the sun. What does that mean, under the sun? It means everything where? In this life, yes, everything in earth. The things that we do in this earth without God attached to it, that's where the worthlessness and the vanity, of course, comes in. And of course, that is another contrast, because that's a contrast between what's under the sun and what's eternal. Yeah. And later on, we'll see that one of those sugar stick verses that the soul sleepers try to use, is that said, the dead know nothing. Even though it seems like the rich man and Lazarus know a whole lot, Luke chapter 16. Well, they overlook the context because the dead know nothing under the sun. See, they don't know anything going on earth. And for people to say, oh, I know so-and-so is looking down on us, right? That's not what the Bible teaches. I mean, you hear that all the time, but the Bible don't say that. As a matter of fact, think about that. If old Lazarus was having to look down at earth and see his family members doing what they're doing, that'd be a miserable existence in Abraham's bosom. Know what they're doing. Well, you don't know what's going on. He's comforted. He's at peace. And under the sun is an important phrase for sure. All right, then, beginning verse 4 and through verse 7, here's going to be some illustrations of vanity. And these things are obviously things that we know about. Number 1, what conclusion can we draw from verses 4 through 7? All these repeating cycles that happen, and all these different natural phenomenon that we can observe with our eyes, It's all a vicious cycle without God. Now, it shows, of course, that there's a designer behind the world that's created, obviously. But at the same time, if it does not cause us to seek that designer, then it's just a waste of time. It's vanity and vexation of spirit. It's like grasping after the wind, So all these different things that go on, even the natural functions of the universe, show that, here's the rain comes and fills up the creek, and the creek runs into the river, and the river runs into a bigger river and runs into the ocean, and then here it starts all over again. And it feels like the older you get, the quicker that happens. Happens, run. And a person that just observes that, they can become somewhat futile in their life for sure. Yes, sir. Exactly. No. It shows that these men were guided by the Holy Spirit and what they wrote. Exactly. Because these things were not actually written into a book and people studied it for years and years afterward. But they were known long before by an all-knowing God for sure. Good point. Right, number 2, and this is one you have to think about a little bit. What is the significance here of the eye not being satisfied with seeing, nor the ear filled with learning? And keep in mind what the verse is talking about, where it's found. All things are full of labor. Man cannot utter it. The eye is not satisfied with seeing, nor the ear filled with hearing. All right? When you think about it, here you are, say you're working at a boiler shop, And of course you're working and you're on the clock, you're making money, you're feeding your family, you got good insurance, all that stuff. And you're building boilers, and you start trying to tell somebody about how you build these boilers and what it means to weld and all that. And they say, I wish he'd shut up. I don't want to hear about building no boiler, But he'd go on and on all day long about that boiler, which ultimately, like the rest of this world, is going to get burned up, Really, this goes to the idea of the grass is always greener on the other side of the fence. Man's not satisfied. Exactly. Exactly.
His 100 acres, he wants 200 acres.
Never being satisfied. With all that the world has to offer, not being satisfied even with a huge amount of it or a easy job or whatever. You know, man never gets his fill of it. I was watching a documentary not too long ago about how they got old Pablo Escobar, you know, and I mean, here was a man that had a president down there in Colombia that agreed with him that he was going to put himself in his own prison. And so he built this luxury motel, like, you know, and he lived out in luxury in his own prison, you know, and he had a certain amount of years that he had lived there. And the thing was, he was a multi-millionaire, but he wasn't satisfied to do his time and then be free and live his life. He had to keep on staying in that cocaine business. Of course, he ends up dead. They end up killing him, you know. But if he'd have been satisfied with a couple of $1 billion, then he could have lived a little bit longer. But he wasn't satisfied with all of that, for sure. And that's the way man is. And even when you talk about the things that go on in life and what you do for a living or whatever, then ultimately who's going to know that? And is it going to matter? Well, of course not. It's not going to matter. You might find somebody in the future that, if there is a future, that will try to look up and see what you did for a living online or something, you know. And maybe even write a book, but that book's going to get burned up too. What's the purpose? All right, number 3. In what sense is there nothing new under the sun? Exactly. Whatever a person has tried to find happiness and contentment in, somebody else has before, you know, and they didn't. You know, they weren't able to do it. And you'd think, when you look back over time at all the people that have attempted to find satisfaction and all in the pursuit of worldly pleasures and couldn't do it, that the ones that are striving for it would say, look, if Howard Hughes couldn't do it, why am I trying? You know, if Elvis Presley can't do it, who am I to think I can? But they don't do that. It's sort of like communism, you know. We just hadn't had the right people at the top on communism, and it'd be a good thing. Believe that. I know who you're going to vote for. Huh? Absolutely. Spiritual needs are the same. Physical needs are the same, you know. So there's really nothing new under the sun. That's not saying do what? Exactly. Exactly. You know, I saw just recently where, I think it was back in the 70s, on the front page of Time magazine, there was a picture of an Eskimo, and it was saying the world was freezing. You know, the temperature was going down too fast and all. And then just within a very short period of time, here it is warming up too fast. You know. But everything is cyclical like that. And everything that we face is repeated over and over and over again, and has been ever since the dawn of time. So since that is the case, then it'd be sort of foolish to get all up in the air over, oh no, it's getting, the river's getting up, you know. Well, why'd you build your house on the river, you silly thing? You know, why? You know, all those people that build houses on the beaches down there where a hurricane's going to come through and blow them away, why do they do that? I mean, they know a hurricane's coming. Now, the last big hurricane, of course, we saw a guy that knew how to build a house that could withstand it. You know, cost a whole lot. But that's what they all ought to do. And not act like things are not going to be like they've always been. Number 4, how could Ecclesiastes chapter 1, verse 10 and 11 lead people to despair. We just read it. Is there anything whereof it may be said, see, this is new, it hath been already of old time, which was before us. There is no remembrance of former things, neither shall there be any remembrance of things that are to come with those that shall come after. In other words, you know, you can put your tombstone up and all, and you can hope that they keep it, the yard mowed there, but it won't be very long before nobody will know who in the world you are or what you did. It won't be that long at all. I know it. That's it. That's it. And that would, without God in the picture, what is the use? You know, it's all grasping after the wind. It's all trying to keep up with the Joneses. It's all trying to win the rat race. But of course, if you win the rat race, you're still a rat, you know. So why even run in that race? Be the king rat, yeah. All right, next page. Beginning in verse 12, and this is where we began reading this morning in our devotional reading. Again, we got the same person doing the talking throughout this book for sure. What did the author of the book set out to find in verse 13? He sought out and searched out wisdom concerning all things that are done under heaven. And what did that result in? That was an awful thing to do. Why did he do it? It was nothing but a travail that God had made for the sons of men to be exercised by. In other words, here's things for people to think about, but when you think about it, what's going to happen from it? I mean, if you figure out everything there is to know, and you don't have God in the picture, it's not going to do anything. It might make you rich while you're here, you know. Somebody might profit off your knowledge, but ultimately it's going to be a waste of time. It's going to be a waste of time eternally for sure. And of course he did this. Of course you have to look at verse 14 with number 2. What does grasping for the wind mean? Oh. Yeah, I know. It's an impossible task. It's an impossible thing. When he says, I've seen all the works that are done under the sun, and behold, all is vanity, all is grasping after the wind. And he says, well, let's answer the question, sorry. What does the author lament in verse 15? What is it he can't figure out in verse 15 that causes him heartache? That which is crooked can't be made straight, and that which is wanting cannot be numbered. Now, that's some discussion as to exactly what's involved in that. If he's talking about the natural things in life that occur, you know, then some things are beyond our explanation, you know, for sure. Just think about how used to is the case that you had springs that you get water from. And those springs were so wonderful, and you knew that they was working their way through the mountain somehow, some way. I mean, you couldn't see there wasn't no tubing back into the mountain or nothing, but you were getting good water until somebody bought upside the mountain and put a dairy farm right where your water was coming from. That messed it all up, you know. So even the things that exist in the world that are impossible in our eyes to correct just shows the futility of trying to figure out all those things that are lacking. And the last point there, it seems to be the common idea that which is wanting cannot be numbered, is that's describing individuals who are wanting in their knowledge of God that cannot be numbered. You know, that number is uncountable because there's so many in that category that have failed to even consider the possibility of there being a reason for us to seek God and His will, for sure. Excuse me. Number 4, how did the author compare with those who preceded him in verse 16? He says, I commune with my own heart, saying, Lo, I am come to great estate, and have gotten more wisdom than all they that are before me in Jerusalem. Yea, my heart and my great experience of wisdom and knowledge. So he knew he was the smartest man there ever was, you know. But what did that get him? greater responsibility. That's one thing. See? The more you know, the more you're obligated to do. See, that's the way it always works. The person that has the greater talent is held to a greater standard because of his opportunity and ability. With opportunity always comes an equal amount of responsibility to do what you have the ability to do. And of course, the point is with that opportunity comes the ability to do more, to continue to increase in abilities to do more. The one-talent man was not destined to stay the one-talent man. If he'd have done what he's supposed to do, then he could develop talents just like the two-talent and the five-talent man did. But he didn't do that for sure. Number 5. Why is there grief in much wisdom? According to Solomon here in verse 18.
The more you know, the more you become aware of different things. Like, I wish I didn't know now what I didn't know then.
Exactly.
Because it brings, oftentimes it brings stress and grief and other things. What's the saying, ignorance is bliss?
Yeah, yeah. And while we wish we didn't know what we didn't know then, which is a pretty good line from a song with Bob Seger, you know. I think it was in Against the Wind. I think that's the name of the song. But you just think about that. I wish I didn't know now what I didn't know then. What I didn't know then, that could be looked upon as cowardly, you know. Or it could be looked upon as not wanting to know all the stuff that was not needed to be known anyhow, you know. Leave it to somebody else to know that. I didn't need to experience that to be able to speak with great wisdom about it, you know. There's some things that you don't want to say, been there and done that, right? Obviously so. And here's Solomon who, with all this wisdom, simply realizes there's so much more to know, and the things that he does know drives him crazy because he can't explain it all, even though he's the smartest man there ever was in the world. It caused him grief and increased sorrow. And it seems as though he develops then, when he starts this next section, he's going to start looking at all these different ways that he tried to satisfy himself, realizing it wasn't in just wisdom. If true happiness was not just in wisdom, separated from God, of course, then could I find it in all these other things? Maybe it'll be in wine and women and so on. Maybe it'll be in building great buildings and orchards where they're lined up trees for miles. And maybe that's where it's at. And we'll see that, Lord willing, in the next few weeks. Thank you so much. Thank you, man. Good. That's the whole reason why I do it. How you doing, Tim? Oh, thank you, man. I love him. Very good.